Amen. Oh, good. And thank you to Mark for covering last Wednesday. I appreciate the fine job that he did with our Bible study, and thank you for your faithfulness. And last Wednesday, we had 25 in on-ramp. Good number. We had 3 couples join and several who are planning to join in the days ahead. So you continue to pray as God is bringing folks to our church on a regular basis. And it's just a joy to be a part of what God is doing here at Grace. Um, my connection with the Poes goes really deep. John was one of my teenagers in Roanoke, so that goes back a long ways. I remember becoming his youth pastor in 1986, and I was his youth pastor from 86 to 90, and then we moved down to uh, Greensboro from Roanoke, Virginia, and John came to Piedmont, and when he came to Piedmont, he came to our church out in Greensboro, and he was one of the best teenagers I had. I'll never forget, though, one Sunday morning, I was preaching a message on the surprise of all surprises. The passage, I believe it's in Matthew, that says, "Many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in your name, and in your name done many wonders, cast out demons? And then I will profess to you, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of iniquity." And there are a lot of people who are caught up in American Christianity, a lot of people who are brought up in cultural Christianity, and a lot of people who are just brought up in churchianity. And John was one of those who was brought up in the church and always felt that he was saved because he was a good kid and he was a part of a good church and a good family, but there was never any reality in his life. Well, that Sunday morning at the invitation, John was sitting toward the back on the right-hand side in that old auditorium at Edgefield, and he came down the aisle, and I thought he's going to join the church. And then I saw tears in his eyes, and I thought he's really excited to join this church. And I said, "John, what's God speaking to you about?" He said, "I need to receive Christ. I need to get it settled." So as a freshman in Bible college, he got that settled. I did John and Debbie's wedding. Debbie is from Winston-Salem. She grew up at Beck's Baptist Church, if you're familiar with the northern side of town. She grew up at Beck's Baptist, did their wedding. They went out from our church in Greensboro to Peru as missionaries. They were sent from Edgefield Baptist, and I had the privilege of visiting them twice on the field, seeing their work and their ministry, 2 different churches down there. And then Debbie, I believe it was had to have a liver transplant. They were just having a good time in their living room, and all of a sudden she started coughing and coughing up blood, and they went to the doctor or to the emergency room there in Lima, and the doctor said, "We're taking her back. She has maybe a 30% chance of living, then you can't go back with her." And John said, "Oh, no, no, I'm going back with her." And he went back with her. Um, and thankfully, Baptist Mid-Missions carries evacuation insurance on all their missionaries. And they quickly got her to the States and got her the help she needed. And she did get a liver transplant and then now to deal with mouth cancer. So would you pray especially for Debbie? It's been a long road for her health, and I know she would be very encouraged to know that the folks here are praying for her. And then I want to thank you all for praying for my grandson, Parker. Um, he got in a sledding accident while we were at the hospital, um, Baptist Hospital. They had 17 sledding accidents come in. There were 1 or 2 deaths and a couple paralyzed. And so we feel very thankful and very fortunate. He is recovering. He's able to get out. He's ready to go back to work, but he has to wait until he's cleared by the neurologist and a couple more tests. But I think God got his attention quite a bit during this time. So I'd appreciate your prayers for Parker, continued prayers as he recovers from his sledding accident. All right, take your Bibles, if you will. We'll be in Acts chapter 4. It'll take us a while to get there tonight. We are in a study called "We Will Not Be Silenced" by Erwin Lutzer. In case you did not know this, Lutzer is the former pastor of the Moody Memorial Church in Chicago, the church that D.L. Moody was the pastor. Very outspoken, very prominent speaker on a lot of the issues of our day, and he tackles all of them. Let me just say this as well. If you missed chapter 6, the outlines are up here and in the back for chapter 6. You'll have to go online to see that. That was the one we missed when we had that snow. You remember? Does anybody remember the snow? I'd like to forget it too, but it sure is nice to have the weather we're having now. So that Wednesday, I recorded that. If you see tonight's, you'll see Mark Seymour from last week because there's a 1-week delay. So you'll have to go back 2 weeks for the Wednesday night on chapter 6 on sexualize the children. I'll just say this, interestingly enough, Canada just had their largest mass shooting, and it was a transgender, I think 17, 18-year-old. And my heart goes out to the young people in this generation because they have been taught so many things that just aren't so. And they're living in a world of uncertainty. And they've been taught that they can't trust anyone or anything. And that's why there is so much turmoil in a lot of their lives. And so go back and watch 2 weeks ago on Wednesday night if you want to do that chapter. Before we get into tonight, capitalism is the disease, socialism is the cure. Let me cover all of what we're going to talk about tonight by saying this. The gospel is not bound to any one form of government. Be sure you understand that. There is nothing inherently Christian about capitalism. There is nothing special or spiritual about socialism. There is nothing that renders itself in Christianity particularly to communism or to a dictatorship. The church was birthed under the Roman government, which was a very oppressive government. The Jewish people were not their own government. They were allowed to do their religious thing, but they were under Rome. They were a captive people. And it was under that kind of government that the gospel flourished. In fact, it turned the then known world upside down. There was tremendous persecution. We'll talk about that Sunday morning when we talk about the timeline of the tribulation. So the gospel is not bound to one particular government system. But there are some things in the scripture that we're going to pick up on tonight. And I want you to see what's going on in our culture. Because we were founded as a nation on the capitalist system, on the Protestant work ethic, on rugged individualism, and we are slowly being shifted to socialism, communism, and groupthink. And it is happening in our schools. It is happening in corporate America. And by the way, I have resisted the temptation to post anything on Facebook because I think everything that can be posted on Facebook about the NFL halftime show has been posted, and some things didn't really need to be posted, all right? So I'll just say that. But the NFL halftime show was not for America. It was for the world. It's the National Football League, and we think it's for us. But that halftime show was not for us. That was for a world audience, all right? And I'll stop at that. Let's talk about socialism tonight. I like what Winston Churchill said. If you're not familiar with Winston Churchill, he was the Prime Minister of England during World War II. He is the one who is credited with holding that nation together keeping them from pushing back the forces of Nazi Hitler. And he said this, the inherent vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessing. And we must recognize that in capitalism, there is inequity. Some people are going to get rich, some people are going to stay in the middle class, and some people are going to be poor. Because capitalism is based on individual achievement and your desire. And if you don't want to make the money, you won't make the money. But if you hustle and you push hard and you go after it with all that you have, you'll probably make a lot of money. So the inherent evil or vice of capitalism is the unequal sharing of blessing. But the inherent virtue of socialism is the equal sharing of miseries, meaning we're all poor together. We're all going down as a group in this. So let's talk about socialism for a minute. And socialism defined is basically this: the supremacy of the state over the individual. It is everyone pooling all their resources together, and as an individual, you really don't get a say. It's the state and it's the group that has the say in everything. How many of you remember, by the way, in high school when you did group projects? I heard a couple groans out there. Do you all still do that in high school, group projects or college? And they'll say, all right, you 5 work together. And when they name the 5 of you, you look at a couple of them, you say, oh man, we're toast. That's not good. We got those 2 deadbeats in our group. And then you got a genius in the group. And then you got a couple of others who will kind of help. And what usually happens? 1 or 2 people do all the work and everybody gets the same grade. That's pretty much a microcosm of socialism. So here are about 6 points about socialism. First of all, matter is the final reality. There is no God. There is no life after death. Now, why do they have to do away with God and life after death? The answer is this: accountability. If there's no one to give an account to, then you really don't have to work all that hard. You really don't have to abide by any particular set of rules, and you can just kind of float along with the group. Matter is the final reality. In other words, this life is all that there is, and you just better hope for the best. They refer to it as godless communism or godless socialism. And you will find in Russia and in China and in other socialist countries, Cuba, that the church and Christianity and even other religions, not just Christianity, but religion in general, is suppressed or held down because they don't want you to worship God up there. They want you to worship the little g God down here. Second thing is economic forces propel history. Whoever owns the means to make money is the one who is in control of history. So they look back at history and they say, aha, here's the reason this person succeeded or that person succeeded. This country was able to win is because they controlled the money. And whoever controls the money, the economic forces, propels history. The third thing is private property is a source of evil, meaning that nobody should have anything more than anybody else. We all should have the same. When I was down in Cuba on a mission trip, I was down there teaching in a local church in their college. I saw how the average Cuban lived, and it's in these large apartment complexes, and they have 1 or 2 bedrooms, and they're usually pretty small, and everybody pretty much has the same thing. One thing I did not see was large homes or mansions or large pieces of property. Everybody had the same thing, and everybody was forced into the same type of housing. Letter D, religion is the opium of the masses. Now, Karl Marx himself wrote that in his book, Communist Manifesto, and what he was meaning by that is this: if you want to keep the masses in control, then give them a religion. And that's why they don't like religion. That's why communism is anti-God, is they look at you people as the masses, and that you're under this dope or this drug or this opium that keeps you from rising up and being discontent with the state that you're in. They really didn't think much of you all, did they? Religion being the opium of the masses. Letter E is this: they believe that the poor are poor because the rich are rich. It's the rich man's fault that you are poor, because if he didn't have all that money, then you would have it. In California, right now, they have a referendum that will be on the ballot to tax anyone who is a billionaire 5% of their total net worth. And that's going to help, they think, to pay for the services, and that the rich need to pay their fair share. Now, here's something a lot of politicians haven't figured out. Rich people are rich for a reason. Some of them inherit it. But if they're not wise, they blow through it and they'll be poor in the next generation. Some people earned it and they appreciate how hard it was to earn. And if a rich person is going to stay rich, they are going to have to do what? They're going to have to manage their riches well. So what they're finding out in California now is about 50% of the billionaires are moving. I wonder why. And New York is getting ready to do the same thing. Tax the rich. I even saw a guy interviewed and said, you do realize, the reporter said to him, you do realize that a lot of businesses will move out of New York if you put corporate taxes so high that they can't make a profit. And this man's response was, well, we can pass a law that they can't move. And I just wanted to say, let me know how that's working for you. But that's their mindset. Poor people are poor because rich people are rich, and the rich are the oppressors, and the poor are the oppressed. I'm reminded of what Ronald Reagan said one time: I never got a job from a poor man. Interesting. Letter F, and that is this: capitalism is based on greed. Socialism is based on need. And therefore, capitalism is inherently evil because it appeals to your desire to have more, to get more, to want more, to do more. And socialism/communism is better because we take care of the needs of everybody. Karl Marx, in his Communist Manifesto, said this: from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Now, what does that mean? Let's make Alan a doctor. Yeah, a brain surgeon, like Jethro Bodine, right? And you know, we can make Mark Seymour a businessman, and both of them are very successful. And in our economy, let's say that each of them pulls in $500,000 a year. in income. Could you handle that? No, not under socialism you can't. You will work as hard as you worked before, but all of your income goes to the state, and we will give you $100,000. You're actually making 500,000, but you're putting it into a pool, and we'll give you $100,000, but you actually worked for 500,000. Now, if I know Alan and Mark, and I know Alan, I'm not so sure about Mark, but if I know him, are they going to work as hard 10 years from now for that 500,000 if all they get is 100,000 back? You two greedy guys. Did you see how that works? They were only in it for the money, to which you say, you're right. There's no incentive for anyone to work harder if everyone gets the same results. From each, according to his ability, sounds real good, and they give this idea that everybody's going to work just as hard for the same amount as they did for a larger amount. But the truth in the human heart is this: if I'm going to work real hard, but I get the same thing as everybody else, why am I killing myself? Remember the group project at school? Well, then they say, well, the problem with that is it hasn't been tried this way. Let's move to point number 2, and that's democratic socialism, not pure socialism, but democratic socialism. And we're seeing this in Zoran Mandami in New York City, the mayor, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, representative from the state of New York, and various other politicians. So I'm not picking on New York because we have some socialists here in North Carolina. But their idea is you take the best democratic society and socialism, and you merge the two, and that will work. Certainly that will work. And their idea, letter A, is this: a future in which social justice prevails. No justice, no peace. And so we're going to appeal to the higher motives of the average American, not greed, and not that we're all going to have the same outcome, but that we're all going to have justice and peace will prevail, and we will have a utopia. Mostly peaceful protests. Do you remember the reporter during COVID, and they were burning down the downtown? I think it was in Seattle. And the reporter is saying, what I'm seeing is mostly peaceful protests, and in the background, buildings were on fire. Let me just stop and say this. Well, I'm getting myself deeper in trouble here, all right? And by the way, all complaints from this Sunday on should be sent to Steve Harrelson at gbcws.com. All right. Thankful the Harrelsons finally are in town. They will be at church Sunday, but they will not be. He does not officially start until Monday. So if you've got a complaint, save it till Monday. All right. Steve's our new executive pastor. Man, I just lost the thought I had right there, didn't I? Oh, protests. Yes, thank you. You don't have the right to protest. There is no right in our Constitution to protest. Oh, yeah, there is. We have the right to protest. No, you don't. You have the right to peaceably assemble. You don't have the right to block roads. You don't have the right to spit on people. And I'm telling you, during COVID, I experienced roadblock in Greensboro, people just trying to go shopping, and the streets were blocked. I've been yelled at. There have been people get in your face and in the windshield of your car. That is not a right of the American citizen. You have the right to peacefully assemble, but you do not have the right to riot or to protest. So I better not see any of you out there. Okay. But their idea is to stir up the social injustice, and let's admit, there is a lot of social injustice, and it should grieve our hearts as believers. But the answer to solving social injustice is not to pit one group of people against another. The answer for the church is to recognize that everyone is made in the image of God and is deserving of respect and love and care, and to reach out to them in the name of Christ. That's the point. So a future in which social justice prevails. The second thing is climate change. And this is being used to bring in democratic socialism. You say, well, what in the world? Climate change. I am 60 and none of your business. Or I like to say I'm 50 with 16 years of experience. How about that? I am old enough to remember in high school when they were teaching us that we were all going to freeze to death, like we did last week, that the earth was going to be covered in glaciers within the next 20 years, and that was in 1974, 75, 76. Some of you remember that? Well, so much for that, because then we got into global warming. Anybody remember all the global warming? And Greta Thunberg lecturing us? How dare you, she says. And do you remember global warming? And then we had a couple of cold winters, and we're saying, wait a minute, if we're having global warming, why is it so cold out here? Oh, that's a result of global warming is causing it to be so cold. And you go, what? So then they changed it to climate change. And now it is referred to as climate change, which we used to call winter, spring, summer, and fall. They say that capitalism is the cause of climate change. And I challenge you, check the resources, and you will find that the most polluting countries in the world is not the United States. It's China and other developing nations. Paper versus plastic. Do you remember when we were younger, everything was in a paper bag? And then the paper bags were depleting the rainforests. We used to call them jungles. Then they called them rainforests, depleting the rainforest. And nobody ever stopped to tell any of these people that trees are a renewable resource. Do you ever notice when you leave a lot vacant and there are trees, if you leave a lot vacant long enough, it will fill up with trees? Because it's a renewable resource. So then we were going to go to plastic, and everything was plastic bags. And how many of you can fit you guys especially, about 10 of those bags on one arm and 10 on the other, so you only have to go in the house once. You don't have to keep going back and forth to the car. But now plastic is out. Why? Well, because we only have so much oil, and plastic is made out of oil. And one of the dumbest things they have ever done. If plastic is bad and paper is good, then they started giving us paper straws, which I'll go on record as I hate those things, all right? They're giving us paper straws wrapped in plastic. Does anybody see any of the sense in any of this? Oil and coal. During the last few administrations, they almost put West Virginia coal out of business because and we have in the United States clean burning coal, and other third world countries that are buying our coal do not use the plants to use the clean burning coal. But go to wind and solar power. And wind and solar power work real good until you don't have any wind and the sun doesn't shine for days. And believe me, I have taken many a cold shower when we were missionaries in Jamaica where they had solar hot water, which did not get hot when the sun was not out. Animal rights versus human rights. Save the whales, kill the babies. Why? Well, if there is no God and you are just the highest level of an evolutionary process, then you're no greater than a fish or a snail or any other thing. Government control over the economy is the ultimate goal. That's letter C there. Do you remember the Green New Deal? And Solyndra? That goes back about 10 years. Solyndra was a company that was designed solar and wind power, and all it did was pump a lot of money into a corporation that didn't produce anything, bought a lot of the materials from China, and then went bankrupt. Electric cars. And I will say this, I'm not against electric cars. I've ridden in a couple of Teslas, and they are very nice cars. My mom owned a Prius, which was a mixture of electric and gas, and it was a nice car. But when the government forces those things on us, there's an agenda. And the idea is to move away from gas-powered. I saw a electric car on the side of the road the other day, and I told Tammy, I guess they're gonna need to go to the electric store and get a bucket of electricity and take it back to their car because they are in big trouble now. Sweden is used as a country to represent, this really works, democratic socialism. Why, look at Sweden. The problem with Sweden is they went into democratic socialism head on, and a lot of companies started to back out, and a lot of the resources started to pull out, and they realized they needed to back up on that. And if you'll do the research on Sweden, you will find that they are not a democratic socialist country in the sense that we're talking about here. There is still a lot of capitalism in Sweden. Do we need to talk about Venezuela? I have missionary friends. One is a national, and then a couple of missionaries with Baptist Mid-Missions that had to be relocated out of Venezuela. They're now in Spain and other countries that watched the road that Venezuela was going down, and they were sold on the idea of the equality of everybody to each, from each. They were sold on social justice, and everything was going to be free, and they got into that and realized financially they couldn't afford it. And the question, it finally dawned on me, why did Venezuela go so deeply into the drug trade? To where they're sending boats and we're having to stop those boats. Why did they go into the drug trade? Because they weren't making money any other way. And the government had to make the money to support all the problems. And it got so bad in Venezuela that they were raiding the zoo in the capital city, and they were eating the animals. I'm telling you, folks, everywhere socialism has been tried, it has been found wanting. Cuba, I told you about my conversation with my translator when I was in Cuba, and he took me up on the roof of the church, and he didn't have nice words to say about communism or socialism. And it's interesting to note that the boats are coming out of Cuba trying to get to Florida. The boats are coming out of Haiti trying to get to the Bahamas and Florida, but there aren't any boats going into those countries with refugees on them. Margaret Thatcher said this, the problem with socialism is that sooner or later you run out of other people's money. That's so true. And Lutzer said in his book, government likes to give away money, but government doesn't have any way to produce money. They are consumers but they are not producers. What's the only way a government gets money? Off of you. And during COVID, I have in my kitchen and in our master bathroom COVID countertops. How'd you get COVID countertops? You remember the checks we got during COVID? I think it was $2,000. And that was sent to everybody. We all got the same. And I put mine to good use. I upgraded the countertops in my house. But that was what the government was doing, was slowly getting people used to getting free stuff. Printing money. Where did the government get the money to send everybody in America $2,000 or $1,000 a person? Where'd they get that money? We were already in debt as a country. You know what they did? They printed more money. Well, what's wrong with that, preacher? When they print more money, the money that is in your bank account and the money that is in your wallet becomes worth less. When Tammy and I first went to Jamaica, the exchange rate on the Jamaican dollar to the American dollar, the first time I went there, it was 33 to 1. It took 33 Jamaican dollars to make $1 US. That was back in the late 1980s. When we went back again, I went back in 2007, the exchange rate was 80 to 1. When we moved there in 2009, it was 95 to 1. Today, the Jamaican dollar versus the American dollar is 155 to 160 Jamaican dollars to $1 US. And what is happening is the Jamaican government keeps borrowing money from the International Monetary Fund and keeps printing money, and their dollar keeps getting worth less and less and less. And in post-World War I Germany, it took a wheelbarrow full of Deutschmarks, German currency, just to buy bread because their money system had been so devalued. So learn early on, nobody gets anything for free. Somebody has to pay the bill. And when the government says they're giving you something for free, they're printing money, and it eventually will come back to cost you. Let me just give you this thought. When we first, and Steve, you can verify this, when we first started looking at a building program here at Grace, the cost per foot for a commercial building was around $150 a square foot, $100 to $150. Yeah. Right now, we are being quoted over $400 a square foot. Now, that's in the 5 years. 5 years' time, it has tripled in the cost. Why? Because so much money has been printed that the money that you have is worth less and less every year. Restrict freedoms. COVID-19. Anybody remember again the restricted freedoms? Well, you can gather in groups of 25, but no more. And I just want to give a shout out to Ron Hawkins and to the staff at Grace. Before I came, COVID hit. I actually candidated here as your pastor under COVID. I preached on Easter Sunday online. I preached the next 2 Sundays online, and you voted that last Sunday online. And I accepted and became your pastor May the 20th, I think it was, 2020. And my first 2 Sundays here, all we had was staff and a few brave souls that came out into the auditorium. Everything was online. We were restricted, and I like the way that Ron Hawkins worded it. As a church, we will voluntarily shut down public services for a while, and we will decide when we go back in. And we were one of the first churches to go back into the auditorium and have regular public services. And that wasn't easy. But I understand what Ron was saying, and that is, we don't bow to a government, we bow to God. And one of the things that really bothered me during that time was churches were shut down, but many bars were not. And the same COVID that they were worried about in the worship center at Grace somehow didn't touch Walmart. And our own governor at the time, Roy Cooper, who wanted all of us to mask up, keep 6 feet distance, and not be in any groups larger than 25, was marching in the streets in a protest, unmasked, with hundreds of people. It was government control. And that's primarily what it was about. Now I got the one little hair on the back of my neck standing up. Because I'm reliving all of that, aren't you? And here's what Ben Franklin said: those who give up essential liberty to purchase a little temporary safety deserve neither liberty nor safety. So what does the Bible have to say about all of this? Well, they would say that the early church practiced a form of communism or socialism. And they would take you to Acts chapter 5, Acts chapter 4, and Acts chapter 5. And verse 32 of Acts chapter 4, now the multitude of those who believed were of one heart, one soul. Neither did anyone say that any of the things he possessed was his own, but they had all things in common. See, that's socialism. There's a problem with that. First of all, this was a temporary situation. Understand that Jews from all over the region came to Jerusalem for Pentecost, which was a Jewish feast, and 3,000 were converted to Christianity just that quick. And many of them encountered intense persecution. They lost their jobs, they lost their businesses, they lost family relationships. Some of them couldn't go back to the country that they had come from to worship. And so there was a dire need, and the church gathered things together to take care of their needs. One of the early disciples, Barnabas, sold a piece of land, gave all of that money to the church and said, take care of the needy in the church. But here's the thing. It was voluntary, not by coercion. They willingly brought what they had and gave it. I like this, verse 33 of Acts 4. In great power, the apostles gave witness to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them. There was not anyone who lacked among them. All who were possessors of land or houses sold them, brought the proceeds of the things that were sold, laid them at the apostles' feet, and they distributed to each as anyone had need. And Joseph, who was also named Barnabas by the apostles, Levite, country of Cyprus, having land, sold it, brought it, laid money at the apostles' feet. So they were voluntarily taking care of the needs of one another. But also understand that the Bible is not against private ownership. Now, here's the rest of the story in Acts chapter 5. Ananias and Sapphira sold a piece of land, and they wanted to be looked upon as spiritual like Barnabas, so they said that they gave all of the money from the sale of the land when they had only given part. They decided to keep back a little bit on their own. And verse 2, they kept back part of the proceeds, and his wife was aware of it and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. Peter said to Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit? Keep back part of the price of the land for yourself. Now watch verse 4. While it remained, was it not your own? It belonged to him, and God is not against private ownership. What he is against is lying about your giving, saying that you've given all when you haven't. So there's nothing wrong with owning things. In fact, Exodus chapter 20, the 10 suggestions, 10 commandments, one of the commandments is thou shalt not steal. Now let me ask you this question. If nobody owns anything, then nothing can be stolen, right? Because it all belongs to everybody. That's socialism. Do you see why there is no problem with looting the stores when a riot goes on and they break into the stores and they steal everything out of that because, well, that belonged to all of us. So the Bible is not against private ownership by any means. Well, let's talk about the Protestant work ethic, because the Bible does teach that we ought to work and to work hard and to do our best to provide for our families. Ecclesiastes, we won't look it up for time's sake, but Ecclesiastes 2:24 talks about what is the whole lot of man, but to work and to gain and to live, and then you die. Work and gain, nothing wrong with that. But let's go to New Testament passages, 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. In the church at Thessalonica, and I'm going to talk about it because we'll be in 2 Thessalonians 2 this Sunday. One of the problems that they had was that they had been told that the rapture had already taken place. I think I've said it here before, in case of rapture, the executive pastor and deacon chairman are in charge, okay? Some of you got that. But they were told that the rapture had already taken place and they were in the tribulation, and they were worried that they had missed out on it. And some of them in the church had just given up. Well, why do I even bother to do anything? And they weren't taking care of their families. They weren't taking care of their needs. And in 2 Thessalonians 3, verse 10 through 12, says this. I'm at 1 Thessalonians. It would help if I get in the right book, wouldn't it? Here we go. 2 Thessalonians 3, even verse 10, for even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. For we hear that there are some who walk among you in a disorderly manner, not working at all, but they're busybodies, stirring people up. And that those who are such, we command and exhort through our Lord Jesus Christ that they work in quietness and eat their own bread. And if you're not going to work, you're not going to eat. Now, let me just stop and balance that with this. Jesus said, the poor you will always have with you. No system of government has totally erased poverty, not even capitalism. But we are to have compassion on those who are unable to work, cannot take care of themselves, those who are in genuine need. The church is to take care of widows and orphans. James says, true religion and undefiled is this, to take care of the widows and the orphans. So we do have a responsibility as God's people. And the passage in 1 Timothy 5:8, if any man does not provide for his own house, he has denied the faith, and he's worse than an unbeliever, an infidel. So we are to provide for our own families, and we are to make enough to take care of the needs of our family and to take care of the needs of those who can't take care of themselves. And I'll give you one more. Go to Philippians 4 and verse 7. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 7, talking about giving. And that is not the verse I'm looking for. How did I miss that? All right, the point that I'm looking for, the verse that I'm looking for, talks about Paul's asking for a gift from the church, and he's saying, not that I desire, it's verse 17, there it is. Philippians 4:17. I missed it by dropping one number. I'll blame it on my keyboard. He says this, not that I seek the gift. He's asking the church to send a gift for the other churches to encourage them. Thessalonica had given, the Philippians had given once, and he's asking them to give again. And he's saying, not that I seek the gift, but I seek the fruit that abounds to your account. That you would give so that others can be blessed, and God will put that to your account. One of the reasons that God blessed England during the 17 and 1800s was that England was the center for sending missionaries around the world. One of the reasons that God, I believe, has blessed the United States financially is because during the 1800s and the 1900s and even into the early 2000s, the United States still produces more missionaries. Now that is shifting. More missionaries are now coming from Asia and from Central and South America, but we still give per capita more than any nation on the face of the earth to reach the world with the gospel of Christ. And that's the last point there is this, that our giving, our money, our generosity is not just a matter of money, it's a matter of the heart, and it is the giving of God's people that fuels the mission of the gospel. Tell you this, and I'm done, all right? In Jamaica, I had the privilege of being the president of the Fairview Baptist Bible College for a very short time, and then I switched to being a professor and also traveling on behalf of the college every weekend, and we did this for about 8 months. There is an association of about 36 independent Baptist churches all across the island of Jamaica. The Independent Association of Baptist Churches. And it's a good group of churches all across the island. And I got to know the history of most of those churches, and the majority of those churches were started by American or Canadian missionaries. And when I got to talk to a lot of the Jamaican people, here's what they would say. If there were no church in America, there would be no gospel church in Jamaica. It was God's people in America sending missionaries. Anybody know the name George Liele? George Liele was a slave who bought his freedom. And after he bought his freedom, I think he went up to Baltimore, and then he was sent out as the first African American, not just the first African American, but the first foreign missionary from America. And you know where he went? Kingston, Jamaica, and started churches all across Jamaica. And so it is the fact that we are blessed in order to be a blessing. And God is using the riches that He has deposited here in the United States, if we will be a channel of those blessings to use them to reach the world with the gospel of Christ. 20% of all that you give here at Grace through tithes and offerings, 20% goes out the door to reach the world with the gospel of Christ. And I believe that's another reason why God has blessed this church so tremendously. Let's pray.